The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu.
Welcome to the next version of our collaborative between the Middle Tennessee Writing Project, the English 4500 Teaching Methods of Secondary English, and the Center for Educational Media. We have today from Central Magnet School, Sarah McDaniel, and she's going to be talking about the Socratic Seminar, Creating the Active Classroom.
Awesome, thanks Ron. So, I teach at Central Magnet. I've been teaching for 11 years. I teach primarily juniors, AP English Language and Composition. And so I want to talk to you today about the Socratic Seminar. And what I love about this practice, I feel it is a best practice, is that it transcends grade levels. It works really well with high achieving older students, but it works really well with first graders. One of my close teacher friends from the writing project teaches first graders, and I've watched her do this with her little bitty babies, and it is amazing with them as well. And so I think when you find a practice that moves that well from grade level to grade level, it is a good one to have kind of in your toolbox. So I thought we would start in a true writing project style by writing into the day. Then I'm going to talk about what a Socratic Seminar is, what it looks like in my classroom. We'll practice a Socratic Seminar as a group, take some questions if we have questions, and then we'll write out the day. And so my goal is by the time we finish today, you'll feel comfortable taking this practice into your own classroom. All right, so let's all write into the day. 2 questions here, and you have your choice. You can write both. You can just write one. What have been your experiences so far with Socratic seminars? Have they been positive or negative? And then maybe what excites or frustrates or scares you about blending student writing and reading in the classroom? All right, if you would turn to someone sitting near you and just share with them what question you answered and kind of the gist of what you wrote.
Wonder, like you said, how do you make your questions? And then they would just roll. And it was one of the best experiences. The negative part.
All right, if you would, come back this way. Does anybody have any thoughts that they would like to share with the group?
I've never experienced a Socratic Seminar, so I don't really know what I'm in store for. But I'm guessing it has to do with a lot of critical thinking. And from what I gathered from him, answering questions and having more questions come from questions.
Absolutely, and that's it exactly. Lots of critical thinking, answering questions that lead to more questions, that lead to more questions. Just kind of this like snowball effect of like a dialogue there. Excellent. Anybody else? Carly?
My first experience was in Miss Esberger's class, and it was one of the more positive experiences I had with it because and it had to do with the students. The students were very apt to talk and question and think critically versus me having to spoon feed them.
Absolutely. I imagine, and you didn't do very much work there.
No.
They just you kind of lit that match and they just ran.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of nice. Yeah. Anybody else? What's your name?
Laura.
Hi, Laura.
I did a lot of Socratic seminars in high school, and I had very positive experience, mostly because I like to talk. Mm-hmm. And but that could kind of turn into dominating the discussion, and so my sense of guilt, I channeled that into learning to ask questions, and had a lot of fun with my classmates whenever I was grouped with people who really liked asking challenging questions to each other.
Excellent. Excellent. And I think you touch on something we'll talk about later is like finding that balance between like how much of a talker should I be, how much of a questioner should I be, how much of a listener should I be, and the best seminars are the ones where students really understand their roles there. I see students do this weird thing, like when we get in it, like they start like leaning back and they're like, Socratic Seminar. Okay. And then as we get into the conversation, whatever we're talking about, they get really weird. They lean in. And then they're like on top of their desk. Like they're excited and engaged and invested in this activity. And by the end of it, I'm like, yeah, that's cool. Asked one question. Anybody have negative experiences with Socratic seminars? There's always one. What was it?
Well, my teacher had asked a question, but then of course one kid totally went off topic, and then the whole class spiraled into off topic, and then we didn't learn anything and people were throwing things.
And so it is student driven, right? So sometimes students drive the path you want them to drive, and sometimes they drive off a cliff. And so we need tools in our toolbox to kind of help them stay between, I guess, the mustard and the mayonnaise on the road a little bit. Yeah. So for me, I stumbled into a Socratic seminar. What I noticed was my students were very well prepared to talk about the plot of a book, right? Tom is married to Daisy. Gatsby loves Daisy. But they were very well prepared to talk about the plot of the book instead of the argument of the book, right? Gatsby isn't about Tom and Daisy and Gatsby and Nick. It's about this like search for the American dream and fulfillment and unrequited love. And those are interesting topics. Daisy is boring, right? But my kids wanted to talk about the boring stuff. They came prepared to talk about, well, I like this and I don't like that. And that is also boring for me because you're a 16-year-old. So their discussions and their writing stayed very, very shallow. There was a lack of passion in their responses, probably because they weren't actually reading the text. They were spark noting, right? There was a lack of thoughtfulness in the text or in their responses because they hadn't actually put any thought into what they were going to say. I wasn't requiring them to put thought into their responses. And I found myself really, really bored. And then I did some research, and I realized that like reading and writing, often the way they're taught, they're very solitary tasks. Students read in isolation at home, and then they come to school and they write in isolation. And we're missing a bridge in between the two of them. That's some sort of discussion about what they read before they write. And for me, Socratic seminars became that bridge. So I decided I refuse to be bored in my own classroom. 2% of the students sitting in my classroom actually go on to become English majors. So all the stuff that I love about English, that deep critical theory, the symbolism, the like full-on nerdiness, they don't share that love. So I have to talk about things that they are interested in and then teach them to talk academically about those things that they are already interested in. Socratic seminars allowed me to do that. And then before Socratic seminars, I would create lists of questions. My students would answer those questions, or Google would answer those questions. And then the only voice that dominated that classroom was my voice. So Donald Murray talked about how students will write well only when they speak in their own voice, and that voice can only be authoritative and honest when the student speaks of his own concerns in his own ways. And so what I took from that was I needed to find ways for students to speak their own thoughts and experiences in my classroom authentically, and then that would translate to their writing. And then that would leave me going home excited about teaching, not bored out of my mind. So that led me to the Socratic Seminar. It is a student-driven dialogue where students ask and answer questions designed to develop a deeper understanding of an issue. So Chris, you hit it right on the head. Somebody asks a question, and that question leads to a question, which leads to a question, which leads to a question. And it's this collaborative group effort to find an answer to the question. And sometimes we find an answer, sometimes we realize the issue is just really big and knotty and complex, and we don't have enough information. Sometimes we leave with just more questions, and that's fine, but it's the journey that's important here. Some benefits of the Socratic Seminar. One, it's student-led. Sometimes it's guided by teacher-created questions, sometimes by student-created questions. I'll talk about how I do that. But it's dominated by student ideas and voices. So what I've found is there's a lot of front-loading here for like how to teach students how to behave in a Socratic seminar, how to teach them what roles to play in the Socratic seminar, how to teach them to create questions. But once they have that down pat, Socratic Seminar days are just fun days for me as a teacher. They do all the prep. They come in and do all the work. I just listen to them be amazing, and then I go home and make everybody in my life hear about what my students said in class that day. There's very little hand-holding when it comes to the Socratic Seminar, and I love that. By the time they are juniors in high school, they should be able to handle academic conversations on their own. And a Socratic Seminar is kind of like a Sparta kick off into that endeavor. The Socratic Seminar really drives home problem solving and critical thinking in almost a Mr. Miyagi sort of way. And they don't realize it. They just get caught up in the excitement and the adrenaline of the moment. And then when we take that to their writing, they're like, oh, I actually know what to do here. It develops nuance in students' thoughts, mostly because they're exposed to a wide variety of ideas. When they write in isolation, or when they read in isolation, or if my voice is the only voice that dominates the conversation, they have the voice in their head and the teacher's voice. And often the teacher's voice is that Charlie Brown teacher, right? So really they just have the voice in their head. But when we have this Socratic Seminar, they're exposed to this wide variety of ideas that broadens their worldview, or at least gives them something to chew on when they go home. It also celebrates students' voices. It implicitly tells them, I think your ideas are important and valid because I'm giving you a huge chunk of my class time. It also creates fodder for writing. One of the things we do after a Socratic Seminar is, before we discuss it as a class, is they just write down every idea that's still in their head in their writer's notebook. So when they go home and I have them write, or when they come in the next day, they have something to pull from. 3 weeks from now, I'll say, go back to your Socratic Seminars. What ideas did you have left over? And they still have things to pull from there. All right, 3 parts to the Socratic Seminar. The prep, which is the most intensive for the teacher. Then the participation, where you just sit back and watch them be amazing. And then the follow-up, where they do some writing or some discussing. So the prep part. The teacher has prep responsibilities. The student has prep responsibilities. The teacher's prep responsibility is choosing a text or texts, creating questions or not, so making that decision, who's driving this conversation, establishing expectations for students, and providing mentors for the Socratic Seminar. Students' responsibilities for this prep: they should read and annotate their text. They should generate observations and questions. Sometimes I allow them to choose the text. So sometimes I'll say, okay, I'm giving you this. You bring in something that either agrees or disagrees with the perspective in this text. So you can kind of layer in other skills as you're moving through this. All right, choosing the text. I think above all else, the text that you talk about is the most important decision you have to make. Everything else is just window dressing. But you want your text to be something that is engaging for your students, especially at the very beginning. Now, once they've done this, I used to loop. I used to teach sophomores, and then I would have them again as juniors. The first part of their junior year, it was just boring stuff, like here's the Declaration, let's have a Socratic Seminar. Here's some John Locke, let's have a Socratic Seminar. Like, but they, once they kind of fall into the groove of the Socratic Seminar, the engagement level of the text is not as important. But for the very first time they do it, it's got to be a good text. So current events are always good. Last year we talked about Colin Kaepernick a lot, and about kneeling during the national anthem. You can look for gut punch short stories or articles. The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula K. Le Guin is always a good one. When they get to that twist at the end, they're always dying to talk about that text. John C. Montgomery wrote a piece called Island of Plenty that makes an argument that we should stop sending foreign aid to other countries before we fix all the problems in the United States. That one sparks some good conversation. So I intentionally, I guess my point here is those first 5 are maybe controversial a little bit. I don't know, as a first-year teacher, if I would talk about Colin Kaepernick in my classroom, right? But that's where the good conversations lie. You are welcome to choose text, like what are you already reading in class? You can supplement what you're reading in class with other articles and pieces. So when I taught Antigone, we would do a Socratic Seminar pulling excerpts from Gandhi talking about civil disobedience, We used Letter from a Birmingham Jail. We used Civil Disobedience. We used an op-ed about the Zarnev brothers from the Boston bombing and their struggle to find burial for that brother in the United States. An op-ed about bin Laden's burial. And we layered that on top of our discussion of Antigone. Okay, so you have lots of options for what texts that you choose. Okay, so my suggestion here when you're working through your first Socratic seminar is to teach your unit how you would normally teach it, right? So if you're teaching Antigone, do all of the Antigone stuff that you would normally do, and then at the end, have a follow-up conversation. And when I tell my kids, like after we do a big unit, when we do our first Socratic seminar or whatever, I tell them, we've talked about what I've wanted to talk about for the last 7 million years, right? Now it's your chance to talk about what you want to talk about. So one of the first things we do is generate a big list as a class of all the big ideas they have spilling over from that text. Maybe I just focused on Antigone and Creon and their struggle, and some little girl really wants to talk about Antigone and her sister's relationship. And then I go home and I try to find something that fits into that table. Or the students go home and they create questions from that big long list. And so I think sometimes if it's our very first one, starting from that list of ideas that students are already curious about is an easy transition into the Socratic seminar. If you have former students who have already done a Socratic seminar, it's often useful that they come into your classroom and model one for your students. So cheat. Find all of your your most Hermione students and put them together and tell them, ham it up, friends. Make this the very best Socratic seminar you've ever done. And that gives your other students a model, a mentor. We did that last year with a brand new freshman class who was just trying. We gave them some of my juniors who had done it before. And they did their little mini Socratic seminar for 6 or 7 minutes. But then they spent almost the rest of that entire period just answering questions from students. How do I prepare? How do I think about a Socratic seminar? What do I look for in the text? And so having that older student mentor was kind of a cheat for that teacher, right? Give students your time to prep. For the very first Socratic seminar, I give them time in class. All right, I want to teach them how to ask questions. I want to teach them how to ask questions in the right way. So I show them that this is important because I'm giving you class time to make it happen. All right. Okay, creating the questions. I have learned that students are really, really bad at creating questions. Sometime, maybe 3rd grade, they learned the what, who, where questions, and that's all they've ever learned to ask, all plot-related questions. So we spend a good chunk of time teaching them how to ask questions. So the first thing we introduce them to is the idea of universal nouns, these big philosophical ideas that apply to almost any situation. And so we ask them to look at the ideas in your text and connect them to these big universal nouns. So what, if you're reading Animal Farm, what ideas or observations can you make about power? What ideas or observations can you make about gender or about social status, right? And so just the same list of universal nouns applied to a text that gets them to a bigger idea. We teach them the so what question from the claim, evidence, warrant. And that so what question is just, why does this topic matter? Why does this matter to us as people or to us as members of society? For informational texts, we go over rhetorical situation. We go over the SOAP tone acronym. We go over the 3 logos, ethos, and pathos, those 3 appeals, right? Giving them ways to work into the text. For fiction, we explicitly teach our sophomores critical theory. But the last 2 there, that 3x3 thinking and the lie questions, are the ones that we have the most success with for our students. Now, I want to kind of deep dive into this a little bit because English teachers do this kind of thinking naturally. We've been trained to ask big why questions, to look beyond the surface of a text. And so if we don't explicitly have ways to teach that to our students, we start them over here and expect them to get over here, but we don't give them anything in the middle to get there. So the lie questions first, there are 3. A literal question. So we ask them to ask a question about what's literally in the text. An interpretive question, to read between the lines of the text. And an evaluative question, does this text still apply to society? Most of our students, if left to their own devices, would just create literal questions. What color was Tom's car? What color was the light across the bay? So we want our students to get to that third level, like how does this text apply to society? That's where the interesting ideas lie. And in going through those other two levels, we'll get to that interesting place. So for a literal question, there is a correct answer. You might need to flip through your text and find it, but should be something where you can put your finger on the text and say, yep, that's the answer right there. So when we read How to Read Literature Like a Professor in that introduction, the very first line, he uses the word milquetoast. I had no idea what that meant. Clueless. Had to look it up. All right, that's a literal question. He references the Faust legend. That's a literal question, right? In order to understand what Foster is doing and How to Read Literature Like a Professor, we have to understand these things. So what I tell my struggling students, the ones who, if all the class is up here in that Socratic Seminar and they're down here, I tell them to start with that literal question, because they won't be able to have that, I guess it should be the other way, that depth of conversation if they still don't understand the fundamental things of the text. So when we start that Socratic Seminar, that kid might be like, look guys, I didn't understand what happened when, or I didn't understand this whole chapter. Can somebody explain it to me? All right, and that gives them a way to get into the conversation without feeling lost. That second level of question are questions about the characters and the events in the story, but the answer can't just be looked up. These are inferring questions. So for Cinderella, you might ask why the time of midnight for her spell to be broken. Why is it significant that she has a stepmother and not a mother? How can her slippers be symbolic? These are questions that one of my students created for our critical theory unit when we looked at fairy tales. Right? Interesting questions. They can go interesting places. That last set of questions is more about the ideas and the themes in the story. So we're looking at how can we apply what we see in this story to the society that we live in. Right? So that same student with the Cinderella story, she wanted to know, where else do we see this rags to riches Cinderella storyline? Why is it so pervasive? Why as a society do we love that story? She talked, I remember 20 minutes about the 30 for 30 on ESPN and how so many of those stories are rags to riches. She asked, do we still accept as a society that a happily ever after for a woman is simply marrying well? That's an interesting question for a sophomore, right? She wanted to know, is it demeaning, as the story suggests, to live a life of servitude? That led to an interesting conversation as well, right? Especially with this idea of rags to riches. We're taught, I remember this class, they got stuck on we're taught to be servants, but we're also taught to want to have servants, right? And then that is an interesting idea when you put them together. That is not something I ever would have brought up in a class discussion that they just kind of stumbled into in their Socratic Seminar. So we start with lie questions, and then we move into the 3x3 questions. And so I tell them, don't tell me the story, tell me about the story. And so we're looking for them to move from literal to abstract writing, because stories are really about the abstract. That's where things get interesting. That's why things like the monomyth are so interesting, because we see that idea again and again and again. Okay, so the 3x3, here's what we tell kids. Write down the plot or the storyline in 3 sentences, each with 3 words. Right, that's your 3x3. So here's a take on a familiar story. Pigs build houses, the wolf threatens the pig, pigs, 1 pig wins. 3 sentences, 3 words per sentence, that's the plot of the story. Now it's a fairy tale, it's a small plot, right? If you're working with a more complex text, you might ask them to just choose a plot line, not do the entire text. Then you ask them to transform their literal sentences, pig build houses, into an abstract sentence. Like when we talk about pigs building houses, what is kind of the idea behind that? What is the theme behind that? What's the abstraction behind that idea? So the pigs build houses, need creates solutions, wolf threatens pigs, outsiders threaten survival, one pig wins, foresight saves the day. Another student wrote, pigs build houses, so people seek security. That's an interesting take on the Three Little Pigs narrative. The wolf threatens them, outside forces threaten. One pig wins. He's a central student, so he decided that the smart ones win. I think that says more about the student than it does about the Three Little Pigs, but that's still an interesting abstraction. And so from that abstraction, we can have an interesting conversation about society, or about who we are as people, or how we function together in groups. And that is always way more interesting than the plot of any given story. Here's one that one of my students did for Frozen. She said, Elsa restrains her magic, power bursts forth, love balances magic. It's adorable. And then her abstraction of that is control necessitates isolation. A sophomore wrote that. And it's just this practice in moving them from the literal idea into an abstraction of that literal idea. Falsehoods eventually falter, true connection emancipates. And everything on the right-hand side of that slide is what we want them to talk about in their Socratic Seminar. So what I asked them to do was take one line here and turn it into a sentence. Hers was, in Frozen, the steps Elsa takes to restrain her magic illustrate the basic human need to control that which they don't understand by isolating the perceived threat from society. And then that sentence or that observation can turn into a question. Does this idea hold true in other areas of our lives? And now we're off to the races, right? Are there places where we need to control, right? Are there places where we react violently to perceived threats? Once we ask that question, the Socratic Seminar is over. They're just gone until the bell rings, right? So let's take a quick break. I've been talking for a while. Why don't you turn with your person sitting beside you and try a 3x3, right? Just choose any old fairy tale story, and let's do 3x3 literal, 3x3 abstraction, and see what we come up with. And I'm going to move you very quickly, maybe 4 minutes. Go.
Sleeping Beauty.
I wrote Princess Lives Happily, which is jealous, curses lifted.
Well, she still has a lot of self-doubt.
Unlikely hero rises.
But that's still
I know.
a summary.
I know.
So it's more like she still doesn't trust herself even though the ocean has chosen her. So.
And then who's the guy, the woodcutter or whatever?
Woodsman.
Yeah.
All right, if you would, come back this way. Okay, so one, I guess immediate observations. This is difficult. That single mini lesson is one that takes almost 1 to 2 periods. But the benefits from that are so long lasting. I remember having this realization, I don't know how I get to the abstract. My brain just goes there, right? But it's because my brain had been trained to do that over decades of teaching and learning or whatever. But our students are still, they're not there yet. So we need to give them these tools. And so I think it's really good for us as educators to experience that this is hard, right? Okay, so anybody willing to share? Carly?
We did Moana.
Oh, Moana.
And our 3 literal sentences are Maui makes chaos, Ocean chooses Moana, and Tafiti's heart returned.
Lovely.
And then our abstract is greed corrupts trust, self-doubt, and adversity, and reconciliation brings healing.
Wonderful. And so I could see turning those into questions and having a very interesting conversation instead of just about the plot of Moana, then the meaning of Moana. Chris, you want to do your last one for us?
Yeah, we did Sleeping Beauty. So the last one I put was Prince saves beauty. And for the meaning, I put patriarchy is the answer.
Again, I think that would just be like a Socratic Seminar ender. He would say that, and then we would just be off. Like, is that problematic? Like, I don't know. And then the kids would just kind of go, right? And so that should be the Socratic Seminar. I just, like, this is such an easy tool. Like, once they get it, they have it, and it leads to some really interesting ideas in their conversations. Now, 2 quick notes about both of those strategies. The lie strategy is the easier of the two, so I start with that one. And so what they're doing with this abstraction is kind of a twist on that evaluative question. So once they have the lie questions under their belt, then we move to the 3x3. Students are very comfortable talking about fiction text. So when you start your Socratic Seminar, it may be easy for them to start with a fictional text, and then these 2 strategies really work well there. So if you start your year, like a lot of like English classrooms start with a short story unit, I would start with these kind of questions as I'm working through the things that students should know about that short story unit, plot and character and whatever, and then have that Socratic Seminar. And then once they have that, like, how does this connect to society thing under their belt, that abstraction, then you can move to nonfiction text or current events, okay? The day of the Socratic Seminar, I like to do a 2-circle Socratic Seminar. Most of my classes are about 24, 25 students. That's a lot of people in one circle jockeying for talking power, right? So we do an inside circle that talks audibly, and an outside circle that works on a back channel chat, having a digital conversation. My inside circle, I let them choose the very first day where they sit. I tell them inside circle will talk first, outside circle will type first, and then they choose. That tells me, the teacher, a couple of things. 1, who is confident and ready to have that conversation. 2, who is nervous about this and chose the outside circle first. And I kind of write down where they sit and take a look at how they perform. Like my outside people, once they get to the inside, if they crush it, they're fine. As they walk in, they choose their spot, and their write into the day is to write an observation about their questions or their reading on the top of their page. What I do with the observations is, after we form our circle, I'll just start with one kid, and they'll say their name, and they'll read their observation. So that kind of like gets you know how you have that frog in your throat sometimes? This gives them that time to get the frog out before the real seminar starts. It also shares some of their ideas. So sometimes when we start, it's like, I heard you say this, can we talk about that? I don't have anything to do with my Socratic Seminar. I put them in the middle, and if they sink, that's amazing. If they swim, that's amazing too. But those heifers are gonna sit in that Socratic Seminar and talk for 15 to 18 minutes. And whatever happens, happens. Okay, it's a nice little learning opportunity for everybody. So if things just go horribly wrong, then I'll fix it afterwards, right? What I'm hoping is that someone in the middle will fix it, who will be brave enough to say, guys, I don't actually think this is what's gonna happen. But what I do for the very first Socratic Seminar is cheat. Don't ever tell my students. I choose a kid to be my moderator. I choose that one. It's usually a female for whatever reason, because I don't know. But I look at my class and think, okay, who is kind, who can do, be my secret spy without letting on that she's my secret spy, and who is believable as having a good first grade idea. And so I pick that kid and I pull them after class and say, all right, last year it was a girl named Emma. Emma, tomorrow when we do our very first Socratic Seminar, we're gonna go around and we're gonna have our observations. And then I'm gonna say, does anybody wanna start the Socratic Seminar with a question? And I want you to sit up real straight and look around and go, I would. And then you're gonna ask a question, and it's gonna be beautiful and great and awesome. And every year they always go, yeah, okay, we're gonna make that question together right now. So she and I sit down and we create a great question, and we talk about why it's a great question. Then when we go out and we do that first Socratic Seminar, we do our observations and say, would anybody like to start for me, please? I would. Beautiful question, right? And so what it does is it's actually a teacher-generated question with a little bit of student input, but it gives that first seminar a really, really good start. And that is so important, right? Everybody in that classroom sees her succeed and they think, well, crap, she just asked a question. I can ask a question, right? Or that's a good question. Here's a good answer to that question. And Emma gets all that social credit. Yeah? Now, my outside circle is talking digitally in that chat room, right? So when they get into the inside circle, if I've chosen my text well, if it's controversial enough, if it pushes enough buttons, if they get fired up, and you know it because you hear them like going to town, they don't need anybody to start that inside question or that inside circle when it's their turn. They get in and we do our observations and they're like, blah, 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 blah. They're just ready to talk, right? And then I say, does anybody have anything to say? And hands go up everywhere. That has never, ever not happened, okay? I prefer that digital conversation because that gives everybody in the outside a chance to test run their ideas, and it also builds some momentum for them in the inside circle, because we all know we talk a lot faster than what we type. I also like that for my extremely shy students who almost always choose the outside circle. It gives them a confidence boost. Dialogue cards and the writer's notebook page, accountable talk. That is a big thing that we hit at my school. I'm 6 through 12, so we started in 6th grade and we hit it every single year. So by the time they come to me, I kind of review accountable talk, but they've got it under their belt. If you know that your students don't have accountable talk practices built in, you have to explicitly teach that to them, or your Socratic Seminar is going to be real jumpy, okay? They need to know, I give them stems either on a card that I tape, like an index card that I tape to their desk and it's just there always, or we create stems as a page in their writer's notebook that they open to in their Socratic Seminar, right? And then those stems, they use to move from conversation to conversation. Carly, I agree with you. Chris, I disagree with you, right? I want to add to what they said, their favorite. Can I springboard off of that, right? And that kind of gives those conversational cues to move the question along. This is how we do this in my classroom.
Do I have anybody on the inside circle who would like to start with a question or an observation? All right, Macy.
Okay, so the first thing that I noticed was that in the 7th paragraph, the author allows the audience to come to the conclusion that if you're mentally ill, you're violent, because she says that emotional disturbance causes them to see that right and wrong take second seat to the voices in their heads, and then she also says lots of them wind up in jail. So I was kind of like curious about if that was actually true, and so I looked up the percent of people that have mental illnesses that commit a crime, and it was only 18%. And also they said that a lot of that reasoning that they did commit the crime was also due to family history, personal stress, and like other things in their personal life, not just their illness. So I was like kind of interested that she like used that as such a big point in her argument, if it she just kind of made it a bigger deal than I think it actually was.
I noticed also, going off your point of it being like familial issues and other things besides their mental health, she says back in the 4th paragraph about how like the adults are useless and they're basing it off of them, and then the 5th going into how the mothers were trying to help the sons who did get arrested and commit these crimes, but then in the 6th one she goes back to saying that it was the fathers who brought this upon them. So she's very contradictory of herself, but never addresses the issue of how those different family relations affect the people differently.
Well, it would probably help her viewpoint if she tries to introduce new info, but even if it's not as big of a deal as it actually is, if she uses it, then she can try to get people on her side.
I feel like throughout the entire essay, she just generalizes a lot of groups. Like she generalizes, I think someone said it in the chat, most of the examples she uses are teen boys. And so she sort of generalizes mental illnesses with teenage guys. And then also, like you said, she generalizes, the parents and how, with mental illnesses, she sort of makes it seem like the parents don't care. And she sort of, and she puts herself on this high standard. She's like, oh, well, I care. and so she makes it seem like she's better than them.
I feel that she's using young men because that's one of the points that she introduced in her second paragraph, where she started talking about her argument. So she said most often young men, and I feel like that's why she was focusing on that for the rest of the article.
What do you mean?
Like, she said that she talks a lot about young men throughout the whole article, and she introduces them in the second paragraph, so I feel like that's why she's doing that.
Do you think teenage men are more likely to commit these kinds of mental illness?
If I knew the rates, I would.
Okay, so there's no rates.
Yeah,
She just focuses on the teenage men and doesn't provide any comparison to, sort of like which one's more likely to commit suicide or murder or crimes and be incarcerated.
I agree with that. And another thing for me is with the statistics that she does talk about, most of the time she claims that they're estimates and not like exact numbers. So she doesn't provide us with solid evidence and like the exact stats that we need. And like I did some research on where she says that at least 6 million children in the country have serious emotional disturbance. And although this was in 1999, in 2016 there were only 74 million children total, and so that's almost 10% of the children that she's saying have a serious emotional disturbance. So I just thought that was interesting.
I would not assess your first Socratic seminar. It is practice, okay? It is practice. And I would tell them that up front. You are practicing. So for all those like little kids who worship at the altar of the Almighty A, they don't have no worshiping today. So when we actually do assess, we are looking for quality contributions, not quantity of contributions. If the student says one thing and that one thing is brilliant, she should get every point she deserves, right? If her one thing deepens the conversation more than the 30 things that this other person said, she deserves every one of those points. We do want everybody to participate. So I tell them up front, if you don't participate here, then you get to do it during lunch one day with everybody else who doesn't participate or is absent. So if everybody participates and nobody's absent but you, it's just you monologuing for 18 minutes. There's always one, and then he goes and he tells his war story, and the next time he's the first person to talk, okay? I don't rescue, regardless of what happens, with the exception of like if somebody is like mean or hateful, but that's also never happened either, okay? There's enough of that like classroom community that they're kind to each other when they speak. I think 18 minutes is a good start for a circle. It gives them just enough time to get over their nerves and start talking and get to the juice of it, the good parts, but it cuts them off right before they really get rolling. That way they're excited about doing it again. They'll get to the fun part sooner. The next time they'll have things to write about when it gets to the writing portion of the day. I would also think about how many people are in your group when you consider your time limit. If you have 27 people in your group and you're only talking for 15 minutes, nobody's going to get heard. Not every single student is going to get heard. If you create student questions or teacher-led questions, I would project those on the board so they have easy access to them. That way you don't have that one kid like shuffling through everything he's owned since first grade trying to find that handout. And then I use the same rubric for grading that I do with their essays. So I teach AP Lang. So a 9 is considered effective contributions, right? So a 50 out of 50, where your contribution's effective at deepening the conversation and moving the conversation forward. So it's a pretty holistic rubric there. What I do while the students are talking, I participate in the chat a little bit, so they know that I'm like looking at what they say. But what I really do is take notes in this spreadsheet about how they contribute to the Socratic Seminar. And I mean, it is quick. So Geoff here, he referenced The Great Gatsby to make a point. He expanded on someone's point by referencing the text. When Julia talked, I wrote, I love that she jumped in with a question and great that she pointed out. Hayden, the only thing she did here was expand on Riley's point, right? So I do this on my computer. I've got a little code here that allows me to send all this information out as an email to my students. So when they get to Their next period, they've got their Socratic Seminar score, but more importantly, they've got this feedback, and they can look at how they contributed to that Socratic Seminar pretty quickly while it's still fresh in their head. Okay? This is also really useful for parents, too. These are the kind of things that little Susie says in class. When we finish the Socratic Seminar, we debrief. Sometimes we do that in between the inside-outside switch. Sometimes we do that after the whole thing is over. But as a group, we talk about what worked, what didn't work, and what big burning ideas they still have. Then I ask them to write. They might write down a list of all the big ideas they have left. If we're practicing a specific skill in class, maybe I'm teaching them counter arguments specifically, I might say, choose something that you know was wrong, that you heard in the Socratic Seminar, and offer a counter argument to that. Or choose something that you agree with, offer the counter argument to that. Okay? And that's just kind of a way to weave in that writing instruction with what they're talking about there. So what I'd like to do here is just try a Socratic Seminar. And you guys have a choice. And would you rather talk about hummingbirds or Serena Williams and her loss in the US Open?
I like Serena.
Yeah. Serena. All right. So that's your first reading. Why don't we take, it's pretty short, why don't we take about 6-7 minutes with someone at our table? And what I tell students is just move through, make notes. What do you find that's interesting? And since it's nonfiction, what does this say about who we are as people or what we value as a society? When you're ready, you can turn and share your thoughts with the person sitting beside you if you're there.
Because, you know, the media is the media, and sometimes they put things in the wrong way. And I feel like I need multiple sources to see if she really had this tantrum.
It's like the expectation. If it was anybody else, it would have maybe been like kind of written off as just, you know, a hothead. But since it's her, it's like she has all these expectations she has to meet.
All right, regardless of where you are, I'm going to ask you to do two things for me, please. First, take a minute and across the top of your page, just a quick observation. What did you notice in your reading or in your conversation with your person that you found interesting? And then once that minute's up, we're going to circle the wagons. I think we're just going to do one big inside circle here. This group is so small and we're kind of limited with the room a little bit. But we're going to start here with Chris and just move our way around our circle. If you would just share your observation for us, just real quick.
My observation was that the reading glazed over the fact that Naomi beat Serena Williams and focused on Williams' behavior instead.
And related, media likes to focus on the drama or like the juicier thing that people want to talk about, which isn't where the credit should be given. You know, Osaka's victory was a big deal, and people really want to talk about Serena's behavior, right?
Upon that, just a little note that she said that she was referencing her daughter, and that she said that my daughter looks up to me, or it was inferred, and I was kind of like, are you sure it's not the other way around? Because you're kind of acting like a little one right now. She was very, very like, give me my bottle, give me my win kind of deal with it.
I guess when I was reading it, the way she was reacting, I would take that as sort of a lack of respect for her opponent. Like she was assuming that she was already going to win this. So that's why she was acting this way.
I have a more general observation. I just said sports seem to bring out high emotions, whether they're positive or negative.
Excellent.
My observation was that the writing itself was more of an opinion piece, and it usually used her first name when referencing Serena loses her mind, unhinged Serena, versus when it would say Williams, it'd be more in a quote.
Excellent.
I asked, is this a bigger issue about athletes being role models? Who would care if this wasn't Serena?
I think that one of the biggest things that stood out to me was, I guess, how she defended herself by throwing out the women's rights issue. And so I said she's a false champion of a cause.
Interesting.
Something I focused on was the talk of motherhood and the opinion of who women should be after becoming one.
Wow.
Yeah, for me it kind of tied in with the role model thing. It was just interesting to me that somebody that was 16 years, the winners age, 16 years older than the winner. It was just so immature.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, this is probably kind of obvious, but I thought it was worth pointing out that the article is biased against Serena Williams, whether that's correct or incorrect.
I didn't like how they booed the winner, however you say her name, Osaka. And that Serena like just allowed it to happen. Like those are her fans. Shouldn't she have like an opinion about that?
Good.
My observation was that it was also an opinion piece and that it was all based on her behavior.
Mine was that it was an opinion piece and that I was curious of what, I don't know a lot about tennis, and what men do so much worse of that she got those massive points taken away from her, and why that mattered, what she said, and what they've said in the past.
Interesting. So such a variety of places we could take this conversation. So if this were the real deal, my Hermione would say, okay, can I ask my question? But I don't have a Hermione here. So does anybody have a question or an observation they'd like to start with? Go ahead.
I think my biggest question is, again, I don't really follow with tennis. So I think my question would be, what is this article getting right about the event and what is it getting incorrect based on me having not actually seen what happened at the Open? That's just kind of my observation, that I don't really know what happened. So I can form an opinion on the article and potentially who wrote it, but maybe not the actual events of the Open.
Did you see what you just did? And how you all looked at me to provide a response? What comes next? You guys go. So what do y'all think?
I actually did read this in the news, and I went back and watched what happened. It all started off with her coach coaching from the stands, which is a big no-no. She claims to have not seen it and been unaware of it, but nevertheless, he coached from the stands. The umpire called it out and took a point away from her. Since she's claiming that she didn't see it, I'm not saying she did or didn't. I'm just saying that's what she has said. She didn't see it. She went off in thinking that he stole a point from her. And as it escalated, he took away more points for abuse of an umpire.
Okay.
And if I was to make an observation, because I don't watch a lot of sports, do umpires usually get yelled at a lot? Like, is it a hard job to be an umpire?
I'm sure.
And why would, I mean, if it's supposed to be unbiased, if the umpire is supposed to not be on the side of either party, you shouldn't yell at them because they're just doing their job.
It's an idealistic world.
It's an idealistic world, but that's how I think it should be.
And that's the idea, and that's how it usually is with something like tennis. But it'd be kind of like charging the umpire in baseball. Like it's a little bit more than just calling him a rude name. But even in baseball, if you call him a rude name, you get flagged or even kicked out of the game, right?
A thing to remember is with any sport, with referees, umpires, what have you, there is an element of human error. Nobody is infallible. And so even when the umpire sees something and calls it one way, the crowd of people around him may have saw it differently, but he has to go on what he's seen. And especially with bigger sports like football, you can go and review and restate your call, whether it's to let it stand on the field or whether to withdraw it. But you just kind of have to go with what you see.
So this is actually kind of reminding me, and this is something I was talking to Shelby about. It was either a year or two ago, and I think it was the Mariah Carey issue where at the New Year's Eve thing, where her mic got messed up, and she was very upset about that. And so I think this raises a question in connecting these two of what can we call human error, like what you're talking about, versus an actual issue on rights and rights being infringed upon. So what's just taking part in the game and what's actually having your rights infringed upon?
Define rights.
So for example, what she's talking about in here, her rights as a woman. So she's saying that men do so much worse and they do not get called out on it. So you're infringing upon my rights as a woman. You're
I don't think that negates
me.
I don't think that negates what she did. I mean, she did something wrong.
Well, I'm
and
saying
then using
it's kind of a question of, like asking that question of what is human error? So the coach made an error in trying to coach her, and then the umpire called on it, and she's trying to deny that. So you would say, like, that's, like, human error is she made a mistake of being coached. She knows that's wrong, and then she goes off on it, versus, like, what would actually be her rights being infringed upon.
Well, and does it matter that this is on the biggest stage of tennis? It's at the U.S. Open, it's one of the biggest tournaments. It's televised. If this is at the, I don't know, Dayton, Ohio Open and it's on ESPN 16, is it as big a deal?
And you feel it, the desire to say things? I need more. Okay, so the very first thing we do is I ask everybody to flip to a clean page in their writer's notebook and just jot down what burning ideas you still have. What's still there to say? So if this were our very first one, I would just encourage students I would give them a bigger block of time to write and just see where their thought took them, right? Just kind of a free write, maybe 10 or 12 minutes. And then when we come back on the next day, we might make that writing a little more formal, right? And work in whatever writing skill we're doing in class then. And the next thing we do is we talk about, as a group, for our Socratic Seminar, what worked and what didn't work.
Let's start with bad news first. What did we maybe not do so well that we could focus on for the next time? What did you notice? Connor?
So the argument was, as a majority, mostly ineffective, but there are certain things that she did well, and we didn't really discuss what rhetorical strategies benefited her point.
Okay, yeah, I heard several things there. Most people who read this article think that it's extremely effective in achieving its purpose. And you guys were just like, nope, nope, trash, trash. So even if you find something ineffective, like you personally find something ineffective in an argument, your job as the reader, though, is to talk about like the intention behind it. So you could say, like, for me personally, this did not work, but she probably did it for this specific audience in this specific context because. Does that make sense? So ineffective for me, but fill in the blank. All right, Austin?
I said, how can we better relate our ideas to the others presented?
Okay, so how do we make those connections between ideas stronger? Do you have a suggestion for that?
Try your best to connect them.
I think that accountable talk stuff that you guys had last year and in middle school is really useful here. As so-and-so said, to piggyback, in contrast. Those intro phrases make those connections stronger. All right, what did we do well? Kendall?
We stayed more focused on the prompt instead of last time where we specifically talked about the argument and then switched to rhetoric for like 2 minutes and we focused more 50-50.
Okay, good. You split your focus. What else?
I feel like we helped to try to like further other people's ideas, like help to try to continue them.
Excellent. I wrote that again and again for both circles. So-and-so extended, so-and-so extended, so-and-so extended. That was excellent. Excellent, excellent. One more thing that you noticed that we did well.
I feel like we gave quieter people more of an opportunity to talk.
I agree. Everyone spoke. Last week we talked about how this is a social thing where there's some listening there involved, and instead of just like the attempt to like get all of your words out. And I thought you did a good job of creating a space where everybody can be involved and active. I have given kids playing cards. Like you get 5 cards. You get 5 opportunities to talk in the 25 minutes that we are speaking. So use them wisely, because once they're gone, they're gone. Or for really persistent dominators, I've filmed them. Like I asked them to, when we finish, like how often do you think you spoke? 2 or 3 times? Okay, just go home and listen. And then they come back and they're like, oh my God, right? I would not want to watch myself being filmed either, so I understand. But I think some of that is explicit instruction that the teacher has to provide for those students because they might not have the emotional wherewithal to realize what they're doing. So keeping kids engaged,
The Socratic Seminar handles that for them. If the only responsibility you have is choosing a text or an idea that's engaging. My quiet kids, putting them in the outside circle and letting them have a chance to practice their ideas and before putting them in the inside circle with other quiet kids makes that an easier transition for them. If they are just painfully shy, I tell them to cheat. Go first, right? Find a friend, sit with your friend, and plan out what you're going to say. I'm going to ask the first question. My friend will say this. I will literally read my answer from my paper. My friend will, who is also often painfully shy, will read her answer from her paper. I will read my response, and then I will say, what do you guys think, right? And then check, right? Just an easy way to kind of move them in. And I think the last one, giving up control. As a teacher, there is such joy in letting the kids do all the work. You go home rested and excited to talk about what they said, and they go home exhausted from thinking. And that's a good day of teaching.